Hello, my name is Logan Sisley and I'm Acting Head of Collections at Hugh Lane Gallery. And welcome to the latest in our series of coffee conversations where we look at work in the gallery. And today we're going to focus on Lavacourt Under Snow by Claude Monet. And of course we're moving things online while we're in the midst of the current pandemic, but we look forward to welcoming you back in the gallery in the near future. So I'm going to show you first the painting as you would see it hanging in the gallery. And here it is in our current exhibition, The Lane Legacy. The painting is on the right of this image. And I think it gives a great indication of the luminous quality of the painting, which from a distance really kind of stands out. I wanted to show you this too to give a sense of scale of the work. The oil painting is approximately 60 centimeters high and 80 centimeters wide. So having seen it from afar, let's take a closer look. And here you see a row of cottages in Lavacourt, a small village, under heavy snowfall, looking across the River Seine to the hills, the snow-covered hills beyond. And Monet painted this in the late 1870s, early 1880s. For many people, Monet wouldn't need an introduction, but I wanted to give you some indication of his work and career, and in particular, the period in which this was painted. Claude Monet was a key figure in the Impressionist movement that transformed European painting in the late 19th century. The movement, as we know it, has its origins in 1874, when a group of artists called this Anonymous Society of Painters, Sculptors, Printmakers, etc., organized an exhibition in Paris. And the group included Monet along with Edgar Degas, Camille Pissarro and others. And though they had different approaches to painting, the exhibition was notable for its independence from the Salon. That's the annual exhibition, which was kind of officially organized, in which a jury from the Académie des Beaux-Arts in France awarded medals. And the independent artists who set up this exhibition in 1874 embraced modernity and represented the new technologies and ideas emerging from Paris and beyond. In the 1860s, Monet had works accepted at the annual salons, but it was a rejection of some of his works that led him to joining with other artists to establish the 1874 exhibition. And in that independent show, one of Monet's contributions was this painting, Impression Sunrise. It drew criticism for its loose brushwork and indistinct forms. To more conservative viewers, it appeared unfinished. And the term Impressionism derives from this painting. It was first used derisively, but was later adopted by the artists. And of course, it's the term by which we know the movement today. Impression Sunrise shows the techniques that many of those independent Impressionist artists used. Short, broken brushstrokes, the suggestion of forms rather than details, pure unblended colors, and an emphasis on the effects of light and shadow. And rather than using, say, whites, grays, and blacks, the Impressionists often represented shadows and highlights in color, which is evident, as we'll see, in Lavacourt Under Snow. Impression Sunrise was painted at Le Havre, the city which sits at the mouth of the River Seine in France. Monet was born in Paris in 1840, but his family moved to Le Havre in 1845, where he grew up. And throughout his long career, the artist depicted the landscape and leisure activities of Paris, the Normandy coast, and the settlements along the River Seine that connect the two. Monet was introduced to open-air painting in and around Le Havre and the Normandy coast by Eugène Boudin, who's known particularly for his paintings of Normandy's seaside resorts. And we have two works by Boudin on display in the gallery at the moment. The beach at Terguéville-la-Sablon is shown here on the left of the slide. And of course we have Lavacourt Under Snow on the right, with another painting by Monet, Waterloo Bridge, in the center. And another work by Boudin that we have is this painting at the seaside from 1867. And in painting out of doors, Boudin, Monet and other Impressionists followed in the path of the group of painters known as the Barbizon School, who had set up their easels in the forest of Fontainebleau earlier in the 19th century. But Monet adopted and extended their commitment to observation and naturalistic representation. Rather than just creating preparatory sketches in the open air, he often worked directly on large-scale canvases out of doors and then completed them in his studio. So Monet grew up in Le Havre, but when he was 22, returned to Paris, where he studied under the academic history painter Charles Claire, where his classmates included Auguste Renoir and other future Impressionists. Throughout his career, he painted his surroundings, the people and places that he knew well, and these include his first wife, Camille, and his second wife, Alice, who we'll come back to shortly. And his landscape paintings chart his travels from Paris to London briefly during the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-1871, and then his return to France, where he settled first at Argenteuil, marked blue on this map, and then later he moved to Poissy, Véteuil, and Giverny, marked green, where he moved in 1883, which is of course famous for his garden, where he painted a series of water lily paintings, which dominate his later work in the 1910s and 1920s. But it's the period when he lived at Véteuil, which is marked red on this map, I guess that we're most interested in, because that is where Lavacourt and the Snow was painted. And of course you see Paris in the bottom right of the slide, and the Seine, the river, winds its way to the coast up to Le Havre in the top left. And Claude Monet, his wife Camille, and their two children moved from Argenteuil, the suburb on the outskirts of Paris, in 1878 to Véteuil, downstream on the Seine. And it's here he painted, as I mentioned, Lavacourt under snow. And in fact, for many years, the painting was known as Véteuil, Sunshine and Snow, because Lavacourt is just a tiny village opposite Véteuil on the River Seine, but it is Lavacourt that he has painted in this scene. And this time marked a particular moment of change in his personal and professional life. His wife Camille, whom he'd married in Paris in 1870, had become very ill. Now she was the subject of many paintings by Claude Monet, as seen here on the left of the slide in a painting from 1873. They moved to Véteuil, but Camille did not recover, and she died there in 1879, and Monet painted her on her deathbed. This time is also a period of financial hardship, as sales of Monet's paintings were slow, and the cost of medical care for Camille added to the pressure. In the late 1870s, he was also more distanced from his fellow Impressionist painters. He wrote to Theodore Duret in 1879, "I've become a country dweller again, and I only come to Paris very rarely to sell my canvases." A further complication at the time was that the Monets were to be joined at Véteuil by another family. There they shared their house with Monet's former patrons, Ernest and Alice Rochedet, who had also fallen on hard times. Ernest, seen here in the center in a painting by Edouard Manet, had been a wealthy businessman and a very important patron and collector of the Impressionists. However, he became bankrupt in 1877 and lost his collection. Meanwhile, Claude and Alice had begun a relationship, and Ernest found employment back in Paris while the family had moved to the countryside. And after Camille's death, Claude Monet and Alice Rochedet continued to live together, and they actually married in 1892 after Ernest's death. And in the painting by John Singer Sargent on the right of the screen, you see Claude Monet painting with Alice sitting in the woods alongside him. And it's also a nice illustration, I think, of the Monet's, or of the Impressionists' practice of painting out of doors that I've already mentioned. So while this rather complicated realignment of his personal life was taking place, Monet continued to paint, and he drew inspiration from his new rural environment. And here we see Monet's painting of Auteuil from 1879 on a much sunnier, brightly lit day with the town reflected in the water of the Seine. He was focusing then on landscapes and often worked out of doors, perhaps in part to escape from the crowded house shared by the two families, which the house also lacked a studio. And it was around this time that he began painting in series, observing the same subjects in different light and weather conditions. And this is something that's really quite notable in Monet's work. And his concern with recording the transient light and atmospheric conditions reaches its peak in his series paintings, such as those of Haystacks, Poplars, or Rouen Cathedral, which is further downstream on the Seine. These dominated his output in the 1890s. And he repeatedly painted the same site in different times of day and in different weather conditions. And here's a view of some of his paintings of the facade of Rouen Cathedral, which shimmers in the light. And he wrote of painting the cathedral, "Everything changes, even stone." He rented a room across from the cathedral's western facade, where he kept multiple canvases in process and moved from one to the next as the light shifted, before finishing them later in his studio. So thinking about working in series, but returning to snow and to the wintry landscapes that he created at Auteuil, in particular the very harsh winter of 1879-1880. And he was really taken by the changes in the landscape, by the extreme weather conditions. And we'll look briefly at a series of 3 paintings that he painted of the River Seine during the breakup of the ice following the Big Freeze. So the ice began to break up in January 1880, and we see 3 paintings. The first today in Lisbon, in which he captures the austerity and brutality of the freezing conditions. Then in a second work from the same viewpoint, he shows how the landscape's changing. There's less ice, but the water level has risen because of the flooding caused by the melting ice. There's more free water in the river, and you can see a small boat has ventured out from the riverbank. And then in the final painting, the heaps of ice are smaller, there's more open water, and painted with dusk, the sky is filled with pinks and violets. And I guess on a personal note, this is a work I was very familiar with growing up, as it's in the Dunedin Public Art Gallery in the city where I grew up. So it's a painting I was very familiar with, hence my choice of this one today. But snow scenes were a favourite among the Impressionists. And Monet painted over 100 canvases that explore the way light plays upon the snow. And of course, they weren't the first painters to tackle wintry landscapes. And we have in Hugh Lane Gallery another extraordinary snow scene, that is Gustave Courbet's The Diligence in the Snow. And here Courbet shows an overturned coach with animals and people struggling in the very deep snow. The landscape dominates the figures in this monumental scene, and it's a monumental painting. And the dark sky threatens above. In contrast to the drama of that scene, let's look at some of Monet's other snow scenes, and also painted in the 1860s is his work The Magpie. And he chooses to capture the less dramatic but equally poignant scene of a bird perched upon a gate in the heavy snowfall. The artist's interest in sunlight and shade is evident here. And this is 5 years before the exhibition, when the Impressionist movement was given its name. So his mode of working was already well established. And in fact, this was one of the paintings that was rejected by the Salon, the official art exhibition, and which is what prompted Monet to exhibit with the new independent group in 1874. The art critic Felix Fenyon remarked that the public, who was accustomed to the tarry sauces cooked up by the chefs of art schools and academies, was flabbergasted by this pale painting. So it's really quite monochrome, and the dominant colour is white, and then you've got that extraordinary shadow cast by, I guess, the weak, low winter sun. And then on the right of the screen, we have snow seen at Argenteuil from 1875. And again, he's painting his local environment, the suburb northwest of Paris where he was living at the time. And it's one of 18 paintings that record the town in the snowy winter of 1874, 1875. It shows a road near Monet's home, and the town's railway station would have been behind Monet as he worked and behind the viewer as we look at it. So the figures making their way through the snow may have been coming or going to or from the trains, and the brown tracks cut through the snow by a cart draw our eye into the center of the picture. And interestingly, Argenteuil was then a developing modern suburb with recently built houses, yet of course the snow masks the town's modernity. It's all hidden, covered up. And while the magpie on the left is notable for the strong shadow cast by the low winter sun, snow seen at Argenteuil depicts an overcast afternoon. And the paint on the foreground is thicker than elsewhere in the picture, perhaps in order to suggest the physical presence of the deep snow. And Monet painted over 100 snow scenes throughout his career, and even embarked on a painting trip to Norway in 1895. And we have an example here, the houses in the snow, Norway, in which you can clearly see the blue that Monet used in shadows on the snow surface, and also the pink highlights there too. Monet wrote to his friend Gustave Geffroy that in Norway the conditions were so frigid that his beard had frozen. He wrote, "I painted part of the day today while it was snowing continually. You would have laughed to see me entirely white, my beard covered in icy stalactites," which really shows his commitment to painting and to capturing the image. And I think that description also conjures up, it's a nice visual image of Monet sitting with an icy beard, which perhaps also relates to his time at Verneuil when he was painting in that harsh winter of 1879-1880. And in that hard winter, Monet was really taken by the changes in the landscape. The river froze, and the landscape was transformed by snow and ice. And he braved the freezing temperatures to set up his easel outside. Lavacourt under snow, you may be able to make out in the bottom right hand of the painting, is dated 1881. But it very possibly dates to that harsh winter of 1879-1880. And Monet, like many artists, often added a signature and an inaccurate date sometime after the picture was painted, perhaps when the work was sold or sent to an exhibition. So we maybe have to take 1881 with a pinch of salt. And the painting is one of a group of similar views looking upstream with the tumble-down cottages of Lavacourt on the right. Here's another example in Portland Art Museum, which Monet painted directly from nature in a small covered studio boat on a day when, as you can see, the River Seine was swollen with snow melt from what had been the worst winter in a decade. And back to our scene of Lavacourt in the snow. And we can see that the composition is relatively simple, which really allows the artist to focus on the play of light on the snow. A strong diagonal line is formed by the houses, and the line of trees guides our eyes over the water of the River Seine with a small outline of a boat. And then the eye is led across to the other side of the river and to the hills beyond. The great bank of snow in the foreground is conveyed with broad brushstrokes, and the whites are overlain with blues that become darker in the middle distance, and which are reflected in the roofs of the houses. And the cold blue and grey tones in the foreground suggest that this side of the river is in shadow, unlike the opposite side, where the pink tone suggests the warmth of the pale sunlight. And Monet mostly used single pigments in their tints, that is, pigments mixed with white, over underlayers which are more mixed. And he doesn't really use earthy colours or black in this painting. Apart from the trees at the centre, which are more thinly painted, Monet used a thick fluid paint. There are two ground or base layers and then a layer of green paint underneath the current composition's grey underpaint. So that green layer beneath this current painting suggests that he may have begun the painting as a landscape in a different season and then overpainted it with the snow scene. And this view of a traditional rural world, largely untouched by industry, contrasts to the scenes of explicit modernity in Paris and its suburbs, with which the Impressionists are often associated. And it contrasts too with Monet's views of London, such as this painting on the left of Waterloo Bridge from 1901, which we also have at the Hugh Lane Gallery. And seeing these two paintings side by side, the contrast between the dense smog of the city and the clear, bright village scene is evident. And just a few notes on the painting of Waterloo Bridge then. Monet had long thought about creating a group of paintings of the River Thames in London, although he didn't start the series until 1899. He spent 3 periods in London in 1899 and 1901. And over the next few years, he was to produce 95 views of the River Thames in 3 major groups: Waterloo Bridge, which we have here, Charing Cross Bridge, and the Houses of Parliament. He stayed at the Savoy Hotel and had a window which overlooked the river, so he could see Waterloo Bridge to his left and Charing Cross Bridge to his right. And he painted 41 versions of Waterloo Bridge, which linked the west end of the city to the more industrial South Bank. And you see the early morning traffic across the bridge, the vertical smoking chimneys, which contrast with the kind of horizontal line of the bridge, and the atmosphere created by a combination of mist and smoke, both industrial and domestic, which is really captured. And to achieve this, he worked at great speed and had a number of canvases on the go at the same time, which were then often completed back at his studio in France. So the working method here in London was very similar to that when he was painting Rouen Cathedral. And Waterloo Bridge was given to the gallery by Mrs. Ella Fry, who supported Hugh Lane's efforts to establish a gallery of modern art in Dublin. And Lavacourt Under Snow was purchased by Hugh Lane himself. Both pictures were bought from the Parisian dealer, Paul Durand-Ruel, who had done much to create a market for Impressionist paintings and who instigated innovations such as solo exhibitions, which I guess we take for granted today. And Lavacourt Under Snow was included in a groundbreaking exhibition of Impressionist paintings that was organized by Durand-Ruel and Sons of Paris and was held at the Grafton Galleries in London in 1905. And you can see Lavacourt Under Snow, I'm just pointing it out now with the cursor, here in the exhibition at the right of the screen. And at the time of this Grafton Galleries exhibition, the English art critic Frank Rutter, who would later become director of the Leeds Art Gallery, launched a French Impressionist Fund Committee, which aimed to buy an Impressionist painting for the nation and present it here to the National Gallery. And Frank Rutter was a friend of Lane's, and here we have a portrait of him from our collection by Gerald Festus Kelly. Now, the French Impressionist Fund Committee that Rutter set up proposed that Lavacourt under Snow be purchased and given to the National Gallery, but it was evidently too avant-garde for the gallery's trustees at the time. The committee was told that Boudin was the furthest limit to which the National Gallery was prepared to go. And so Boudin's The Entrance to Trouville Harbour was bought over the Monet painting. So Lavacourt under Snow was instead bought by Hugh Lane. And the painting was put on display in Dublin from January 1908 when Hugh Lane opened the Municipal Gallery of Modern Art, now known as Hugh Lane Gallery, which was then on Parnell Street, then on Harcourt Street, not on Parnell Square where we are today. After the gallery opened in 1908, the English Impressionist painter and theorist Winford Dewhurst wrote to Hugh Lane praising him for the 2 Monets in the gallery. He said, "Of the pictures of Monet, you have in number 109, which was Lavacourt under Snow, you have one of the very finest paintings in existence, a real masterpiece. Some little time ago, I subscribed a guinea to a fund for the acquisition by the state. The other Monet, that is Waterloo Bridge, is also a masterpiece. I saw it in process at the Savoy Hotel, London, 7 or 8 years ago." While Lane donated many works to the gallery from the outset, he placed a group of paintings on loan on the condition that a new purpose-built building be constructed to house the collection, as the gallery was then in temporary rented accommodation, and Lavacourt under Snow was among these conditional gifts. Various sites and buildings were proposed for the new gallery, and Lane favoured a gallery bridge spanning the River Liffey designed by Edwin Lutyens. When Dublin Corporation narrowly voted against the proposal, Lane removed his group of continental pictures that were on conditional loan and put them on loan instead to the National Gallery in London, to whom he bequeathed them in his will. After his death aboard the Lusitania in May 1915, a codicil to the will was found leaving him to Dublin. However, though the codicil was signed, it was deemed invalid as it was not witnessed. A decision that did prove controversial, but therefore the painting stayed in London. So Lavacourt under Snow was accepted by the National Gallery a decade after Frank Rutter's proposed gift was declined. However, since 1959, a number of agreements have been in place allowing the paintings in the Sir Hugh Lane bequest 1917 to be shown in both Dublin and London, which is why that we have it on view here today. And some of that group rotate between the 2 cities, including Lavacourt under Snow. The paintings currently featured in 2020 in our exhibition, The Lane Legacy, which was launched on the 20th of January by President Michael D. Higgins, and 20th of January 2020 was our 112th anniversary. The exhibition celebrates the gallery's founder, Hugh Lane, and all the works in the exhibition were donated by him or his supporters, including the general public, artists and collectors. And we have 24 of the Hugh Lane bequest paintings on display. That's the group that we share with the National Gallery in London. And of course, as I record this, the gallery is currently closed to the public, but we really hope you'll be able to visit the gallery to see Lavacourt under Snow later in the year and experience this extraordinary luminous painting in the flesh. Lavacourt under Snow is a stunning example of how Monet rendered the world he saw around him through paint. It demonstrates many of his key concerns, his keen observation of the natural world, his exploration of the interplay of light, shadow and colour, and also his practice of working out of doors. So while travel is restricted at present, if you're in Dublin, when we open, do come to Hugh Lane Gallery and be transported back to the village of Lavacourt in the harsh winter of 1879-1880. Thanks for listening today, and do look out for more of our coffee conversations on our YouTube channel.